Hey guys, this week we are going to be reviewing comparing decimals, and we are also going to be talking about adding and subtracting decimal numbers as well. So the first thing we want to start off with is review comparing decimal numbers, because that is something that we talked about on Tuesday and on Friday right before Christmas break. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my computer screen over to my whiteboard so that way you guys can see the different questions that we are going to talk about. There are 5 different ones that we are going to go over very quickly, and then we will move on into introducing adding and subtracting decimals. So if you look up at the top, the first 3 problems that I have are just simply greater than, less than, or equal to questions. And we are going to use these signs, greater than, less than, or equal to, in order to compare these numbers. And I'm sure these are signs that you guys are very familiar with, as you've probably seen them throughout your school career. Anytime that we are choosing whether or not we are finding greater than, less than, or equal to, we are going to want to line up our decimal numbers. So something that I always like to do is I just use the first number here, and I'm going to write this one right underneath it. So I'm going to write 3 and 85 hundredths right underneath 3 and 86 hundredths. And when I look at them, I'm going to compare the digits by place value. I'm going to start all the way to the right in the ones place, and I have the same number here, so I'm going to check that off. Those are the same. In the tenths place, I have an 8. Those are the same. I'm going to check those off. In the hundredths place, though, I have a different number. I have a 6 and I have a 5. My bigger number here is going to be 6. So my 6 is the biggest. That means that 3 and 86 hundredths is bigger than 3 and 85 hundredths. So here I would need to use the greater than sign to compare. I can read this sentence as 3 and 86 hundredths is greater than 3 and 85 hundredths. So then the next problem that I have 4 and 12 hundredths compared to 41 and 2 tenths. So again, I'm going to write this number, and I've got 41 and 2 tenths. And I notice it doesn't line up exactly the same because I have a blank over here in the hundredths place. I can easily put a 0 right there to compare those two numbers. All right? So the first thing that I want to look at is going all the way to the left-hand side where the 4 is. I notice I have a 4 in the tens place. I don't have a digit up here in the tens place. So this automatically tells me that 41 and 20 hundredths is bigger than 4 and 12 hundredths. So that means that on this one, we are going to have a less than sign. I can read this by saying 4 and 12 hundredths is less than 41 and 2 tenths. And my last question on here, I have 85 and 6 tenths compared to 85 and 60 hundredths. So again, I can write this number below, lining things up to make sure everything looks equal. And I notice in the tens place, I have an 8 in both, so I'm going to check those. A 5 in both the ones place, I'm going to check those. A 6 in the tenths place. And then here I have a 0 in the hundredths, but I don't have anything here. I can add a placeholder again to line it up, make sure it's nice and equal, and my placeholder digit is always going to be 0. So I have both a 0 in the hundredths place there as well. So therefore, these two numbers are equivalent. All right. The last 2 questions that I'm looking at here ask which decimal has the greatest value. So I'm looking at this set of numbers first. I have 2 tenths, 27 hundredths, 29 thousandths, and 231 thousandths. So first thing, again, I'm going to make sure that I add my placeholders in there and line everything up. So I'm going to put a 0 there, 0, 0. So I've got everything lined up. I'm going to go through and start making my checklist. I have zeros in all of the ones place. So those are all the same. In the tenths, I have 2, 2, 0, 2. Well, I'm looking for the greatest value. 0 is not going to be the greatest value, so I can go ahead and mark that number out, okay? And now I got to go to my tenths. I've got a 0, a 7, and a 3. Well, out of those three numbers, 0, 7, and 3, which number is the biggest? Right, if you said the 7, that is correct. So I'm going to circle the 7 because that means that I can cross these two numbers out. And the number with the greatest value is this number here, and it is 0 and 270 thousandths. Or I can take that 0 out and just read it as 0 and 27 hundredths. So my next set of data over here, I have 0 and 3 tenths, 0 and 37 hundredths, 0 and 39 thousandths, 0 and 331 thousandths. So again, I'm going to line everything up, add my placeholders in there, and then I can start to compare. In the ones place, I have all zeros, so I can give them a check. In the tenths place, I have a 3, a 3, a 0, and a 3. So the smallest number there is going to be 0. I can cross it out. And then in the hundredths place, I have a 0, a 7, and a 3. So very similar to the other set of data we looked at. The biggest number there is 7, so I can circle it. That means that the number with the greatest value is 0 and 37 hundredths. I can cross out my other two values.